unfounded in 2014. Following the final rejection of the asylum applications, the respondents did not leave South Africa, nor were there any attempts on the part of the Immigration Inspectorate to remove them. The respondents alleged, however, that the situation in Burundi worsened in 2015, and they could not have returned as it was not safe for them to do so. In 2018, the respondents considered themselves surplus. Translated loosely, this means on-site, or not moving, or on-the-spot refugees, and were assisted in preparing and submitting a further application for asylum on this basis. The third applicant, the Cape Town Refugee Reception Office Manager, took the stance that the respondents were not entitled to bring the subsequent applications for asylum after the final rejection of the initial asylum claims in terms of the Act, and refused to consider their subsequent applications. This impasse led to the present litigation. The High Court concluded that an interpretation that an asylum seeker does not have a clear right to make subsequent application after a failed application would not be inconsistent with the Constitution, the Act, or international law. Aggrieved by this decision, the respondents, with the leave of the High Court, had their appeal considered by the Supreme Court of Appeal. That court granted an order in favour of respondents, holding that once a refugee surplus claim had been made, the claim must be addressed, even where the initial claim had been finally determined. It is this decision of the Supreme Court of Appeal that is the subject of the present application for leave to appeal. According to the applicants, international law does not recognize the right to submit subsequent applications, nor does such a right exist under the Act. They argue that the respondents conflate surplus claims with subsequent claims, and they contend that a surplus claim does not equate to a right to make a subsequent claim for asylum, but represents a distinct category of refugee applicant. The applicants further submit that once the original application process has been concluded, the individual concerned falls to be dealt with in terms of the Immigration Act. This, the applicants say, is intended to ensure finality. However, they argue that the Supreme Court of Appeal's judgment is contradictory in that it rejects the contention that the Act and the principle of non-refoulement allow for subsequent applications, while simultaneously accepting that international and comparative law do not bar subsequent applications brought on a valid basis. The respondents, on the other hand, argue that they are both refugee surplus and re-applicants because they are persons who seek to file subsequent applications without returning to their country of origin due to substantial change in the circumstances in that country. The respondents contend that the applicant's approach misunderstands the nature of the right of non-refoulement and the protections flowing from that right. The question is not whether there is a right to submit subsequent applications, but whether persons seeking to rely on the right can show that they have the type of well-founded fear that falls within the criteria for refugee protection, and if so, the right of non-refoulement shields them for as often and as long as is necessary. The respondents claim that the Act explicitly contemplates the filing of subsequent applications subject only to a refugee status determination officer's assessment of whether such subsequent applications are abusive in terms of Section 1 of the Act. The Scalabrini Centre of Cape Town and trustees of the Scalabrini Centre of Cape Town were admitted as amici. Amongst other things, the amici raised that the Act, understood in the light of South Africa's constitutional and international law obligations, both permits and requires the consideration of surplus and subsequent applications. The amici highlight that the principle of non-refoulement is foundational to international refugee law protection. This court is indebted to the submissions of the amici. There are two primary issues for determination by this court. The first is whether the court has jurisdiction to hear the matter, and if so, whether leave to appeal should be granted. The second is whether failed asylum seekers have a right under the Act to make subsequent applications for asylum. The second question turns on the proper interpretation of the Act, specifically whether it provides a clear right to submit subsequent asylum applications. In a majority judgment that I penned and in which Malambo Deputy Chief Justice Matopo Nhlanhla, Musi AJ, Savage AJ, and Chiki concurs. This court holds that the matter engages both its constitutional and general jurisdiction in that it concerns the interpretation of national legislation passed to give effect to South Africa's international law and constitutional obligations owed to asylum seekers. It also raises an arguable point of law, namely, whether a person whose application for refugee status has been refused has a right to make subsequent applications for asylum. The issues implicated in this matter are significant, extending beyond the interest of the litigating parties. This court is satisfied that leave to appeal must be granted. The applicants have also sought condemnation for the late filing of their application for leave to appeal. There is a reasonable and acceptable explanation for the 14-day delay, and the respondents will not suffer any prejudice. Condemnation is accordingly granted. Turning to the substantive issues, the first judgment identifies the need to have a clear understanding of the concept of surplus refugees and the related but different concept of subsequent applicants for asylum on the part of a failed asylum seeker. This court in Ruta describes surplus refugees as an internationally recognized category of refugees that enter a country on one basis and are involuntarily rendered refugees due to supervening events in their countries of origin. However, the term surplus has also been incorrectly used to describe a situation when a failed asylum seeker seeks to make a subsequent application for asylum surplus, that is on the spot, based on changed circumstances. A first-time surplus application is in truth no different from an ordinary claim to asylum and must be processed in the same way. However, subsequent surplus claims rest on a different footing, and there are valid reasons for treating them differently. Such claims would follow a failed asylum application and would generally warrant considerations that were not applicable in the first-time application. Most importantly, evidence of a change in circumstances which may lead the decision-maker to grant instead of refuse asylum. In this regard, the first judgment considered the foreign jurisdictions of New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and the European Union, all of which govern subsequent requests for asylum differently to those of first-time applications. The first judgment then proceeds to address the interpretation of the Act, relying on the trite principles of interpretation, considering the language used in the Act, understood in its context, and with regard to the purpose of the legislation. In doing so, it raises that at the heart of the matter is the issue about whether the Act, properly interpreted, creates the right for a failed asylum seeker to make subsequent applications. It is not about whether, as a matter of policy, such a right should exist in the scheme of the refugee protection framework in South Africa. That question, important as it is, does not arise from the case that the respondents advanced and the relief they sought, but they loom large within the context in which the case was argued. Whether a right exists in international law but is not provided for in the Act is a question about the inclusiveness of the Act and may also relate to the constitutionality of the Act. These questions, which to a significant extent have been foreshadowed in this matter, may well arise for determination in the future. The first judgment, however, does not address those issues. They were not pleaded and are not before us for determination. The Supreme Court of Appeal reached a conclusion that a right to make a subsequent application existed in international law, and arising from that concluded that the subsequent surplus applications of the respondents should be considered. In doing so, says the first judgment, the SCA did not undertake any analysis of the Act as to the source or the basis on which it found the Act created a right to make subsequent applications. This court in Ruta said that South Africa's obligation is to ensure that asylum seekers have the opportunity to apply for asylum, but that the manner in which this was afforded was for Parliament to decide. In doing so, this court described the Act as creating a system that was both practical and hard-headed. The respondents alleged that the Act gives them the right to bring a subsequent claim on the same basis that it did in respect of their first claim. The respondents place reliance on the definition of, quote, an abusive application for asylum, close quote, in Section 1 of the Act in support of their stance that the Act creates a right to make subsequent application. The first judgment says that beyond defining what is abusive, there is nothing else in the Section 1 definition or the Act as a whole which provides for the right to make a subsequent application. If the Act evidences a right to make subsequent applications, then it should, at the very least, describe the right and what it entails, as well as how it is to be exercised. This is how other jurisdictions deal with recognizing the difference between a first and subsequent application, as already indicated. It would require a giant leap in reasoning, says the first judgment, to suggest that the mere inclusion of a reference to prior applications in the definition section, coupled with the absence of provisions excluding such applications, is dispositive in answering the question as to the existence of a right. The Act, if interpreted as the respondents argue, and in the absence of a framework for subsequent applications, will result in every subsequent application, irrespective of its merit, being treated in the same way as a first application. Such a subsequent applicant would follow the ordinary course of having an interview and a full determination of the application, and to the review and appeal rights that attach to the first application. Such an asylum seeker will also be entitled to the issuance of a Section 22 visa that will regularize their stay in South Africa. If such a person is in detention as an illegal foreigner following a failed asylum application, they will be entitled to their release following an intimation that they wish to apply for asylum again. All these rights flow from the Act and would apply to all applications, both first and subsequent, if the Act is interpreted as creating the right the respondents contend for. In those circumstances which the Supreme Court of Appeal described as a never-ending cycle, an unsuccessful applicant for asylum will never be capable of being returned to their country of origin. The first judgment questions whether such an interpretation would render the system of asylum a practical system that Ruta described, when there would be no end to the right to bring continuous applications after a failed application. The first judgment does not suggest that every failed asylum seeker will seek to exploit the opportunity to make a subsequent application and enjoy the benefits that go with it, even when there is no basis to do so. Rather, it says that common sense must recognize that unless the protection system is able, if required, to separate out and provide a proper framework for addressing first and subsequent applications, then a real risk will exist of a single system being abused. While the first judgment does not suggest that abuse will be inevitable, it cautions that in the real world, if a system by its design is open to abuse, then the risk of abuse will be real. Certainly, in a world fractured by poverty and lack of opportunity, many people seek a better life through economic migration, and if the system of asylum is open to providing them with ongoing protection, they will consider it and will likely opt to use its benefit, even in instances when they have no prospects of obtaining asylum. The revolving door scenario will undermine the integrity of the system. To force the Act to bear the weight of subsequent asylum applications as it stands will place those applications in a framework which was not designed to accommodate them. In conclusion, the first judgment finds that the Act cannot bear the weight of subsequent application asylums as it stands. To conclude differently would place those applications in a framework which was not designed to accommodate them. So too would it invite the inevitable chaos which accompanies what at best may be described as vagueness. In the circumstances and for those reasons, the first judgment would grant leave to appeal, uphold the appeal, set aside the order of the Supreme Court of Appeal, and in its place make an order dismissing the appeal from the High Court to the SCA. There is also a second judgment that has been prepared in this matter by my colleagues Rogers J. and Nichols A.J., and I will request my colleague Justice Rogers to read that part of the handout note, whereafter I will then conclude by reading the order in this matter.
The dissenting judges, Nichols A.J. and myself, disagree with the first judgment on whether the Act permits a second asylum application after a first one has been rejected. In our view, the Act is reasonably capable of, indeed should bear, an interpretation that allows a further application. We note that the state's case hardened over time. Initially, it said that a failed asylum seeker had to leave South Africa and return to apply again. Later, they argued that repeat applications are never allowed. The first judgment accepts this absolutist position, stressing that the Act contains no express repeat application procedure and warning that permitting later applications would invite abuse. For the dissent, a blanket bar creates a serious gap in a statute designed to prevent refoulement. We use asylum seeker X. Her first claim is rightly refused because at that time conditions at home did not justify protection. Later, conditions deteriorate and she now faces persecution or serious harm. If no further application is allowed, X must be deported despite the new risk, making the statutory and constitutional commitment to non-refoulement hollow for people whose eligibility arises only after a first refusal. This also yields irrational distinctions. If X leaves after the first refusal and later flees again to South Africa when conditions worsen, it is unclear why the law should still bar her or why it should require her to reset the clock by returning to danger first. The dissent contrasts X with Y, who entered at the same time but did not apply initially. When conditions later deteriorate, Y may apply, while X is deported solely because she previously tried and failed to regularize her position through the asylum system. Relying on Section 39(2) of the Constitution, the dissent stresses that statutes must be read to promote the Bill of Rights and that courts should prefer a reasonable interpretation that avoids constitutional invalidity. Non-refoulement protects a cluster of rights, notably dignity, life, freedom and security of the person, equality and related freedoms, and applies to foreigners, including unlawful entrants. A reading that forces removal despite genuinely changed circumstances would frustrate the Act's rights-consistent purpose. Children's rights follow a caregiver's asylum status. If a caregiver cannot apply afresh after material deterioration in her home country, children may have to return to conditions inconsistent with the constitutional rule that their best interests are paramount. The dissenting judges stress that Section 233 of the Constitution requires preferring interpretations consistent with international law. Non-refoulement is foundational in refugee law, reflected in the 1951 Refugee Convention and the OAU Convention. The United Nations HCR guidance assumes that systems will have a way to consider later applications or to reopen matters where genuinely changed circumstances arise. Because children are often affected, the dissent also points to international child's rights instruments that treat the child's best interests as a primary consideration for refugee-seeking children. Section 2 of the Act gives non-refoulement overriding force. The dissent says that this must weigh heavily in interpretation. The statute should not be read to authorize removals into danger unless it clearly says so. As there is no express prohibition on second applications, the Act can be read coherently to permit a later application when circumstances have materially changed. On the substantive criteria, Sections 3 to 5 govern qualification, exclusion, and cessation. None treats a prior refusal as a ground of exclusion or cessation. Thus, if later events mean a person now satisfies Section 3, the person should not be barred from invoking the asylum process merely because an earlier claim failed on different facts. We then turn to Section 21, which grants the right to apply for asylum under prescribed procedures. It does not say that the right may be exercised only once, and implying a one application limit would involve inserting restrictive words. The dissent reasons that it is unnecessary for workability and conflicts with Section 2's protection against refoulement. We add that the functus officio principle does not prevent a fresh application based on materially changed circumstances. A key contextual indicator is the Act's definition of an, quote, abusive application for asylum, close quote, which includes an application made after one or more refusals, quote, without any substantial change in circumstances, close quote. The dissent says that this is impossible to reconcile with an absolute ban. The legislature contemplated later applications and chose to treat them as abusive only where there is no substantial change. This, we reason, strongly supports reading section 21 as permitting a fresh application in appropriate circumstances. We reject the claim that the Act lacks a mechanism for later applications. Section 24 requires an RSDO to reject an application if, inter alia, it is, quote, abusive. Because, quote, abusive includes repeat applications without substantial change, the Act sets a screening threshold for fresh applications. Absent material change, the later claim must be refused. Practical concerns, such as disclosure of prior refusals, identity checks, screening repetitive claims, can be managed through regulation-making powers and ordinary administrative practice. They do not justify reading an absolute bar into the statute. We add that the provisions dealing with the consequences of a final rejection, including amendments effective 1 January 2020, do not negate a right to reapply when circumstances materially change. A person may become an, quote, illegal foreigner, close quote, after refusal, yet still be entitled to seek asylum if later events bring them within the Act's protective scope. The dissent disputes that later developments can be handled adequately through appeal or review. Some refusals attract no appeal. Review is ill-suited to wholly new factual bases, and appeal timelines mean that deterioration in the home country occurring a significant time after the first refusal will be beyond the reach of appeal or review. On surplus asylum, we note that refugee systems commonly recognize eligibility arising from events after entry into the new country. It is therefore anomalous to deny protection simply because of an earlier unsuccessful claim predating those events. As to fears of a flood of repeat claims, the dissent says deterrence should not come at the price of deporting people with genuine, newly arisen claims. The Act's, quote, substantial change in circumstances screen, supported by regulation and administration, provides a workable filter and aligns with comparative practice. The dissenting judges would thus have granted leave to appeal, but dismissed the appeal on the merits and ordered the applicants to pay the first and second respondents' costs, including the costs of to counsel.
Thank you, Justice Rogers. I accordingly make the following order. 1, leave to appeal is granted. 2, the appeal is upheld. 3, the order of the Supreme Court of Appeal is set aside and replaced with the following, quote, the appeal is dismissed. 4, each party is to pay its own costs. In this court, the judgment is handed down. Court will adjourn.